So I am delighted to welcome you this afternoon to, I believe this is the third professional development session that JANZSSA is running this year. My name is Professor Caroline Rueckert, and I'm the Dean of Student Experience and Employability here at Griffith University. And it's my absolute pleasure to be facilitating a professional development session today on the topic of professional papers. The goal of the session today is to really walk you through at a high level what is a professional paper, how does it differ from a peer-reviewed paper, to really break it down, and to have an opportunity to answer any curly questions that you might have around all things related to professional papers. Before I kick off, I do want to acknowledge country. I am today coming from Yugara and Turrbal land, and I want to pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge these have been and always will be Aboriginal lands. And I do so within a context of really having reflected on the importance of that ritual of acknowledgement of country. And for anybody that might not know its history, I just wanted to recommend an absolutely fantastic reflection video that Braden Hill has recently posted on LinkedIn. And if you are new to and don't know the background of acknowledgement of country, I'd highly recommend listening to Braden's very thoughtful reflection of situating that concept. So with that, I've talked a little bit about what you can expect today. We're going to start very high level with covering the differences between what a peer-reviewed paper versus a professional paper is. The next part is really breaking down the component parts, and I'm going to use a best practice example to give you a sense of what that actually looks like in practice. And then there'll be an opportunity for us to have a conversation around data and ethical considerations. And I'm also going to recommend some resources as well that will help you on your journey. Because there's a lot to cover, and I really want to make sure that I'm being attentive to any questions you might have, I just ask that you hold your questions until the end, or pop your questions in the chat, and I promise you I will get to all of them. Before I dive in and start with understanding the differences, I just wanted to say a couple of introductory framing comments. The reason we're running this session is because we often talk about we want research-informed practice, but we also want practice-informed research. And often we start and we prioritize the research component, and the practice component becomes the second part of the conversation. We recognize that when we're working at universities, we need both expertise sets to be at the table. And we've got a really strong history of fabulous partnerships where researchers are leading the way, but we've also got such strength and diversity of expertise in our practice realm. And this session is really about making sure that the voice of the practitioner can be a voice that is heard, can be a voice that meaningfully informs research, and we really create a culture of partnership between that academic and professional realm. So if you are a practitioner in the room and this is your first time, thank you for taking the time to be here today. And I wanted to say, no matter where you are at in your journey around publishing, you are in the right place. And the session is really to help motivate you. If you are a researcher coming today, and it's an opportunity for you to also hopefully think about the work that you do from a slightly different perspective, and hopefully inviting potentially some new ways of working with your practitioner experts at your institutions. So that's a little bit to set the scene. So I wanted to start by, before we dig into what a professional paper is, I think it's really about understanding what it is and what it's not. And it's often the first question people ask. And I wanted to say that there isn't really necessarily a black and white answer to this, but here are some broad differences between the two. The first key difference, I think, between a professional paper and a peer-reviewed paper sits within the purpose of the paper. When you write a peer-reviewed paper, most often the goal is that you're seeking to contribute to research, and you're wanting to further the knowledge pipeline. And that then informs ultimately how you structure a peer-reviewed paper if that is your goal. The goal of a professional paper is often, yes, to contribute to research, but often the purpose for a professional paper is much broader than that. The goal is often for practitioners to share insights, to reflect on experiences, and really to share practical insights that will inform program improvement and that will transform the practice component. Which is quite different again from a peer-reviewed paper. There's also significant differences often around audience, that a lot of peer-reviewed papers, the primary audience is more other academics, researchers, and scholars. For a professional practice paper, the audience might be all three of those stakeholders, but often professional practice papers are often written with the view of the practitioner in mind, and really with a view of how do the insights from practice help us continue to refine our approaches. And those can be often very operational matters, they can be pedagogical matters, they can be structural and conceptual approaches. So again, the audience for professional practice papers often much broader and more diverse. There's also key differences around the evidence-based thresholds required for a peer-reviewed paper versus a professional paper. And what you can see in a professional paper is there's often a much broader set of insights that are brought. It's not uncommon within professional papers to have a really strong focus on case studies and to be much more focused on how things are delivered. Versus within a peer-reviewed, again, there's a much higher threshold around being rooted within empirical research, much more rigor around data analysis, scholarly citations, and again, how that evidence is scoped and presented. So in a lot of professional practice papers, for example, you won't necessarily see a strong focus on methodology or methods, which again is quite different than a peer-reviewed paper. The other bit is a professional practice paper from a structural point of view. It tends to be a much more open and a much more flexible and more hybrid structure. Although there are certain things we definitely would be looking for around a professional paper. And that's, again, quite different from a peer-reviewed paper where there is a more traditional format where there is usually an introduction and context section. Most peer-reviewed papers will have a literature review, a methodology and methods section, a data findings, data discussion review. And again, in professional papers, you will see potentially a much more flexible approach of what is included in the paper. And then finally, in terms of impact, there are also key differences within a professional practice paper. Sometimes the impact that is talked about is more linked to things like, for example, program improvement, versus in a peer-reviewed paper, impact is more around how did this particular initiative demonstrate, for example, gains in retention, learning outcomes, or learning gain. Now, don't get me wrong, a professional paper might also include those, but a professional paper will also include recommendations around program design. It might, have recommendations around a more sustainable way to allocate resources. It might have recommendations around different approaches to capability building or different ways of aligning it to a service design or things like that. And again, a lot of those recommendations might not necessarily make it into a peer-reviewed paper. So that's just to give you a really high-level overview of the differences between a traditional peer-reviewed paper and a professional practice paper. I should be really clear that there is a lot of overlap, and a good professional practice paper will do a lot of what a peer review does. But again, think of it as it's doing often that, plus it's doing different things. So for example, I spent a lot of my career designing programs, and for example, when I go to conferences and I'm looking at a session, I'm looking for what's the evidence base, what's the impact, but I'm also, as a practitioner, coming to those conversations asking, is that scalable, is that sustainable, how would that work within my university structures? And again, I'm thinking about those things in a very different way than, for example, a traditional academic who doesn't necessarily have to deliver programs and services. They may not be asking the same questions. So now that I've given you a little bit of the high-level overview, what I wanted to do for the rest of the session is to say, okay, well, if it's not a peer-reviewed paper and there isn't a fixed structure, what are some of the things that if you want to write a professional paper that you might need to be thinking about that constitute a really good, high-quality professional paper? Now, I'm going to outline these things not because I want to take a prescriptive approach, but just to give you a sense of what a good quality approach might look like in the different component parts of a paper. But again, I'm not suggesting that this is fixed in stone, but this is again my best sharing of what I've learned over the years in terms of how to do this well. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to draw on a case example that comes from the Student Success Journal. This is a fantastic professional paper, and I'm going to use this as a bit of a test case. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to share at a high level, this is what you would include in an introduction, and then I'm going to give you a sample of what it looks like from this particular paper. And I had to pick one around cultural competency because that's a topic that I'm particularly passionate about. So the first thing a good professional paper does is it introduces the practice initiative, and it really sets the scene for the broader paper. So what does it mean to introduce a practice initiative? Often what happens with as practitioners is we're in a university and, we'll get a knock on the door and we'll say, okay, we've got this problem and we've got to solve a problem. So the first thing a good professional paper does is it really defines the opportunity or problem at hand. And it really outlines what is the problem that the practice example is seeking to address. And it really outlines the key challenge, and it provides the relevant background information on the challenge ahead. So, if you're an international student, the challenge might be that international students don't necessarily understand work rights, in Australia, and as a result, they're going into interviews potentially and experiencing barriers. That would be a really good example of a problem that we want to solve potentially through a practice initiative. The second piece that a good professional paper does is it provides a rationale and explains why it's important to address that problem and why that's important, not just in terms of the institutional context, but a good professional paper also situates it within a broader sector context or in the context of emerging trends in the sector. And again, you want to make sure that in the introduction that your reader walks away with understanding why this initiative is significant and how it ultimately, if we did this as a practice initiative, how it's ultimately going to improve the student experience and achieve better outcomes in terms of student success, engagement, and well-being. So what does this look like in practice? Well, in the context of the sample that I've given you, this is a paper that was focused on cultural competency. So you can see here on the left, in terms of setting the scene, it's talking about how Australia is now a multicultural society and home to people from many different countries. Almost half of Australia's population were born overseas or have one or both parents born overseas. Given the populations in Australian cities and in university classrooms are now more diverse than ever, the cultural competency skills of planners has increased in relevance and significance. And there is clearly now an urgent need to promote cultural competency in education of urban planners at university, since these will go on to ultimately design, manage, and plan Australian cities and potentially others throughout the world. So this practice report explores the challenges made to a first year, changes made to a first year unit within the urban and regional planning Bachelor of Arts degree at Curtin University. The challenges relate to an attempt to increase the cultural competency of students within the classroom. So what you can see here in the introduction is the author is very clearly setting the scene and providing a background context. We've got a multicultural society. We've got regional planners who are now having to work within that multicultural context, and that is prompting then, if they're going to do that, there is an urgent need to make sure that we're uplifting their cultural competency. So you can see here a good approach around background and context, clearly identifying the problem worth solving, and they're also talking about ultimately the outcome that they are seeking from this this intervention, which is to increase the cultural competency of students within the classroom. So again, a good professional practice paper really does a good job of setting the scene before we jump into what is the practice initiative. So that's the first bit, is what you need to do around that scene setting. That then leads into, once you've established what the problem or opportunity or context is that's led to the development of the initiative, the second part then is situating the practice initiative within the broader scope of prior practice. And that you can do that in a couple of different ways. One, you can recognize established practice of what has happened before and what are the different approaches already taken to solve a particular issue. The second thing that you'd want to see around situating the practice is that's where you really do want to draw on research and existing scholarship. So if somebody else has encountered a similar problem and they've tackled it in a particular way, you'd want to be drawing on research and any scholarship that you can find on the initiative. And then the other piece that's important around situating a practice initiative is also thinking critically about the relevant context that you're operating within. And this is again where it's about looking at the institutional context. Is there a particular cohort that you're working with? Is it within a particular discipline? So again, you're situating it at multiple levels. You're situating it in terms of where does this fit in with existing practice? What can we learn from the broader research and scholarship on the topic? And then three, is this specific just to your own institution, or is this again a sector? And again, the situating practice, that's the second thing that a good professional paper will have before we dive into the specifics of what you've actually been delivering. So what does this again look like? I just wanted to give you another example. So I'll just read this out loud. According to Doan and Lieber, the idea of cultural competency can be traced to the 1930s, when the field of medicine highlighted the need to reduce cultural prejudice and embrace differences that could affect the provision of care to people of color. ... There are many different definitions of cultural competence, and most focus on the capacity to work with difference. The literature suggests that cultural competency can be nurtured at various scales. These include the institution, the classroom, and the individual. Jackson et al. Highlight the importance of the educational climate in which students study, arguing it is essential students perceive the university as an inclusive environment. Institutionally, Curtin University developed a diversity and equity strategy 2018 to 20 with targets to promote awareness, capability, inclusion, and leadership. So you can see here just in this short excerpt that the authors again are doing the situating around practice at multiple layers. They're situating it in the context of the literature and the different approaches around cultural competence, and they're being really specific about which particular approaches they want to pick up. But they're also doing that second bit, which is they're also situating the conversation around their practice example within their own institution and how it fits in, for example, within their policy context and the particular priorities that are driving their institutional practice. So again, when you're thinking about the situating your practice example, there is no one way to do it, but those are some of the different threads that you can draw to frame your practice example. And again, those of us who are asked to design new initiatives, this is the legwork we do anyway. When you write a professional paper, it's really just about putting into writing that work you're probably already doing, but now you're formalizing it in a more specific context. So once you've situated your practice, then the next bit is to actually outline what it is. And to really outline the design and then the implementation process of your practice. So what does this mean? Well, the first bit is it's not just about saying we're doing a writing program or we're doing a peer intervention, but it's really outlining for your prospective reader to give them a snapshot of what does this look like in practice? What are the different component parts of your practice initiative? And to also take the time to talk about the development process and ultimately the implementation process of your practice initiative. So what does this look like? So here's an example from the key paper that they've pulled out. So I'll read it again out loud. So we used 6 approaches in the classroom, in the field, to try to promote and enhance cultural competency and embed it within student learning. Firstly, we tried to create an inclusive classroom. We used physical design to modify the room and create different zones to encourage open discussion. Secondly, following Doan and Lieber, we used explicit readings and films to highlight the ways that class, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, disability, youth, aging, and Indigenous issues are linked to and affected by urban planning. And thirdly, one staff member conducted a self-awareness exercise and encouraged the students to reflect upon their own sense of identity. We developed a, quote, "Who am I?" exercise to explore identity, building on Weaver's concept of the iceberg to explain the seen and unseen elements to culture. So you can see here, the authors are talking about a cultural competency practice initiative that they've implemented in the classroom. And you can see here, they're not just saying we implemented it, but they're really breaking down the different components and the different sub-threads of their practice initiative. They're aligning it again back to that literature I talked about in the previous section. And what you would want to see there is also any particular discussion around that were significant around implementation. And again, this is where a lot of the variation can come in. So you're not just saying what you did, but you're talking a little bit about anything that's significant around the design and the delivery of your initiative. So some of the key things to pull out when you're describing your practice initiative is you want to pull out the key outputs, which are what did you deliver on, what did you do. In this section, you want to also, if you can, try to talk about the scale and scope of the initiative. Was this within a single classroom? Was this across multiple classrooms? Did you deliver it to a small cohort, a large cohort? How did you make decisions around your cohort? Again, a professional paper would also talk a little bit about resources. You know, were there any particular infrastructure requirements or technologies that you used or staff expertise that was part of the delivery and the design of your initiatives? Other things to focus on is timelines. You know, was this a one-off initiative? Is this something you delivered in a scaffolded, multi-pronged way several times? I've already talked about the who was involved. And again, as much as possible, if you've done a really good job of situating your practice examples, you also want to be pulling out when you're describing your practice, if there were any particular nuances that you made, for example, that are specific to a target audience or discipline. So again, with the description of the initiative, think of it as I'm a fly in the wall. I often go to conferences and I'm really excited. Okay, there's this new initiative around academic coaching. I know the theory, I know the framework. When I go to sessions, what I'm really looking for is, okay, I want to know what it looks like, and I really want to see the different component parts. And for those of you who are practitioners in the room, you'll know exactly what you're looking for. Think of yourself as you're going to somebody else's session. What would you want to know about a practice initiative? And again, that's what you're focusing on around the practice description section. All right, so you've done all of that. Take a deep breath. Let's keep going. All right. So once you've outlined the development and the delivery of practice, which if we were to use program logic model speak, that's where you're talking about the outputs. The second part of a good professional paper is you're also sharing the outcomes and the insights from your practice initiative. So remember at the beginning we talked about what's the problem we're trying to solve, and what you know, if we did this well, what would success look like? The outcome section is essentially where you're answering that question. So what does that include? In a professional paper, the short answer is it depends. If this is a new initiative, you're not going to have long-term impact outcomes. And so that might not always be possible. But what you do want to focus on is you do want to have a look at what was the short-term impact of your initiative, and how are you measuring success of the initiative. And at a short-term point of view, you might be looking at things like engagement and uptake, and who participated, and you might be looking at things like parity of access. But you also then want to be looking at more longer term measures, which is, did it improve, for example, students' learning gain? Did it improve progression and retention? Did it help build, for example, if it's an employability initiative, did it help build career confidence? So, and this is again where there's that overlap between the peer-reviewed paper and the professional paper. We do want to be making sure that we have a proactive data and evaluation strategy that we build into our practice design. And really in the outcomes section, you're sharing your findings. But the other bit is, and this is again where a professional paper is slightly different, you also might have other kinds of outcomes and insights that are actually more related to the delivery of the practice initiative. Things that you could be highlighting there, for example, would be if you noted that in order to achieve a particular outcome, that you might want to say things around how scalable the initiative was. You might want to have insights around whether the initiative required a particular level of competency or expertise. And again, in this section, you also want to be highlighting any unexpected or insights that emerged from the delivery of your practice. And you want to be thinking about that in two different lenses: outcomes and insights that will help you with program and project design improvements, and then outcomes and insights that are actually about the impact of your initiative. And again, a good professional paper actually straddles insights in both of those contexts. So what does this look like? Again, going back to our sample paper, in 2021, 38 students completed a survey on their perceived cultural competency at the start of the semester and again at the end. The survey asked the students to rank the frequency of behavior from 1, almost never, to 5, always, in relation to 20 statements about dealing with difference, discrimination, and diversity. With these self-reflection surveys, the results indicate whether the students place themselves for each of the cultural differences. Although all the students in the classroom completed the survey population is small and the results cannot be considered scientific or representative. That said, the results are to some extent indicative of the teaching and learning effectiveness within the unit. The percentage change is simply comparing before and after results as perceived by students. As an aid to learning, the before and after results offer the students a useful structure to express their thoughts and reflections. So you can again see within this section, the author is clearly outlining the tool that they were using in order to demonstrate impact. In this context, it was a survey where they were reporting on learning again. You can see in a professional paper, again, where there's overlap, you're scoping are these findings transferable across a broader context? And I guess the bit that I just wanted to flag there is, within a professional paper, you do want to talk about outcomes, but again, it's going to be framed within a much broader context than, for example, a peer-reviewed paper. So now that you've done you've outlined the outcomes and insights, what I want to now do is, what does it mean within a professional paper to talk about implications and recommendations? Sorry, it's been a long morning. So within a professional paper, this is actually, I think, where we really see some of the key differences. In a peer-reviewed paper, you might have recommendations, which is about future research. You might have recommendations that are aligned to, for example, a broader, if you have a particular initiative that you've trialed and tested within a particular cohort, you might be a recommendation that you trial it with others. You might make a recommendation around the theory or the method that you've used. Within a professional paper, a lot of the recommendations are actually linked to the practice itself. And where you're focusing on, are there particular things that you can do to refine your practice to improve? And again, sometimes improvements are related to sustainability, making it more scalable, making it a better suit for your institution. So you might have a recommendation that's institution specific around, we want to link this initiative to this other thing that we're doing at our university. And you might, for example, say in its current model, it wasn't sustainable, or we think that this practice initiative could be run better if we integrate this systems requirement into it. So again, within a professional paper, your recommendations are not just to improve the outcomes, but actually also focused on improving the delivery of the practice initiative. So again, the scope is much more open and a lot broader. So again, another example, and this is again a little bit more on the traditional side of more of a peer-reviewed, but I just wanted to pull this out. So this practice report has highlighted the need and benefits of improving cultural competency within the field of urban planning. Although we do see these, quote, how-to strategies as a contribution that could help others respond to the same kinds of institutional drivers for teaching cultural competency, it is less clear as to what extent each of these strategies may have affected students' self-reported levels. That said, the data from the 2 cultural competency surveys do suggest that levels did indeed increase. Overall, it appears that the strategies adopted in this unit may have made a useful contribution to enhancing the cultural competency of the first-year urban planning students in this unit. So what you can see here is, within the context of this particular practice paper, the focus on implications is very much focused on the students and their learning gain and the outcomes of the students. And that's absolutely something that you do want to focus on in a professional paper. But again, what I would propose we might add to implications is, again, all of those other things which, as a practitioner, and think of it is, I'm now going to go to my my director or my DVC education, and I want to now make the argument of I want to take this pilot practice initiative that I've undertaken, and I've had a really good gain. Think about the recommendations as, what would you have to say to your supervisor in order to get funding to grow this? And again, a DVC E is going to be interested in what's the impact on the student experience, and is it leading to a positive outcome? But a Deputy Vice Chancellor will also be asking, how does this fit within what we're already doing? They will ask, is this a sustainable, scalable, will we have a good return on our investment in terms of funding? Will this model work across different component parts? So again, for a practitioner, when you're having to make funding arguments, you can't just go and say, well, we've had a good gain on retention. If your initiative has a great gain on retention, but it's not scalable and it's not sustainable in the current funding, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get it up at a broader institutional level. So again, that would be my advice when you're writing a professional paper. Put that lens of, you're making an argument to your university to deepen the investment in your initiative. How would you make that argument? And that'll give you a pretty good indication of what you want to pull into your professional paper. So I've spent a little bit of time just walking you through some of the things to be thinking about around professional practice. But again, I'm just very high level. Be really clear. What is the problem your initiative is trying to solve? What's the opportunity you're trying to activate through your initiative? Situate your practice. And again, that's about internally within the institution, but external drivers. Take the time to outline the design of your practice. And again, really break that down. Imagine you're talking to another practitioner. Talk about then your outcomes and what you learned by the implementation of your practice, and then finally the recommendations, where to next. And again, that advice of, pretend you're walking into your Deputy Vice Chancellor Education's office and making an argument. The other question that often comes up with professional papers is, do I need ethics clearance, and what are the considerations around data in professional papers? So here's just a real quick snapshot. So first of all, if you are seeking to collect data with the specific intent to publish on your practice initiative, you do need to seek formal ethics approval. And I would recommend every university will have obviously an ethics team. So if at all in doubt, always ask and make sure that you are working with the relevant experts in your institution to clarify whether you do need ethics approval, and to make sure that you're aligning to your institutional policies. Within a professional paper, we would always publish we would never publish identifiable or sensitive data. Again, and again, if you have any questions around the thresholds for that, talk to your ethics experts at your institution. And it's also really important that if you are intending to ultimately publish on your professional paper, on your professional practice initiative, that you are being transparent about the data that you're collecting, what the purposes of that data collection is, and how you're going to be sharing that. So one of the things is I've spent a lot of my career in the third space, and one piece of advice I would have is if you think you might want to publish on it and share it more broadly, then take the time to do the ethics application and to make sure that you're skilling up. Most institutions will have professional development support in order to do that. The other bit is this is where the partnership becomes really powerful. It can be incredibly powerful where we combine professional staff expertise with academic expertise. So ask yourself, are there any internal experts in my institution that have research expertise in these areas? It's something that I have done my whole career, and inviting our academic colleagues to be partners with us around research design and also practice design. And again, that leads to, I think, better outcomes for our students because we can make sure that our practice is always aligned to literature. We have a rigor around our approach to data analysis, and also it enables us to activate those research strengths around methods and methodology. So again, my tip would always be make sure, one, that you're partnering and you're seeking relevant advice from your university about data and what data requires ethical clearance. To look for opportunities for partnership with folks that may have expertise that you don't have. And again, my advice would always be, if you think you might, then make sure that you're being rigorous and thorough around those ethics essentials. So I want to end the session before I open it up for 20 minutes of questions is just around some recommended resources. And the first one is I wanted to say, if you've never written a professional paper, can I invite you? Jump in. Because I have worked with so many amazing practitioners who have these incredible insights that never get shared. And one of the things we're doing at JANZSSA is we want first-time authors to feel that you're not just throwing something into the ether and hoping it's going to stick, but if you submit a manuscript to JANZSSA and we read the manuscript and think, hey, there's a really great concept or a really good idea here and we really want this shared in the sector, we will actually automatically invite you to join our writing coaching program where you'll have an opportunity to be matched with an experienced writing coach, and their explicit service is they will work with you to improve your manuscript. So they'll work with you and sit down and say, you know, this is where it's really strong. These are the bits that are missing. There'll be a sounding board for you. It's a free service that we offer. You don't need to apply for it. We will automatically invite you to participate in the program. You know, if you submit a paper and it's just not there yet in terms of going through a peer review process, instead of taking you through a process and then having an outcome at the end, what we want to do is to say, hey, we invite you to participate in this writing coaching program and then come back to us with a slightly more mature manuscript that we can take through review. So that's the first support resource I just wanted to flag for you. It's something that is really unique about JANZSSA and something we're really proud of, and all of the coaches are experienced, a mix of experienced academics and professional staff who have all published professional papers and will be really well positioned to support you. The other bit is there is a plethora of fantastic resources across the sector. Everybody's going to have their own, but these are just some when we were asking our editorial board and also our writing coaches for their recommendations. Here are some that have come up. And then the final bit I just wanted to say is I hope the session today has been useful. I'm looking forward to your questions, but I also wanted to say we run a whole range of other professional development sessions for the sector. And we have a number of sessions around Shut Up and Write workshops. Those are perfect if you are like me and you occasionally struggle from writer's block, they're facilitated by Laura and Megan. That helps you scaffold what it means to write, and they'll give you some really good tips. The other benefit of the writing Shut Up and Write workshops is you get to engage with peers. And again, every workshop will give you a bit of a taster of how you can design the habits to support your writing. We also run a range of professional development on things like writing an abstract for conferences, how to take your conference abstract and then translate it into a professional paper. And again, these are all run throughout the year. I'm really delighted to have Megan Pozzi and Laura Burge be the two co-facilitators. And again, you couldn't have a more supportive and fantastic facilitators for those sessions.